Welcome to From the King's Pen. I'm Arthur Diaz, and I'm here to share with you a dose of writing, speaking, learning, and trying to live a little bit better day by day. Today I have with me Doughty, also known on Twitter as the Psypreneur. Joey has a very interesting story. He went from being what he calls unofficially homeschooled to studying at Georgia Tech and then becoming a software engineer, only to later change course completely and become a science-based performance coach. Come check out his very inspiring story. So Joey, welcome to From the King's Pen. Did I get anything wrong there? Everything sounds about right, the basic intro?
Nope, that was perfect. And thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, man. So, first and foremost, I want to understand, how did your self-improvement journey start? From what I gather, it started many years ago, right? Like, it's been a long journey for you. It's not been like a lot of people who got on Twitter during the pandemic and started working on it. You started way back when, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a long story, but something to keep in mind is self-improvement, self-actualization is a long journey for anybody, really. I mean, it's really an unending journey that takes us months, years, and we pursue for as long as we possibly can, ideally. So mine started, I would say, roughly 15 years ago. It's a little bit late in the day here, so math is hard for me. But I'd say about 15 years ago, it'd be about 11 years ago, I'd say. When I was 20, I was about 370 pounds. I was playing World of Warcraft, a video game, for 16 hours a day, roughly 12 to 16 hours every day. I had no friends, no schooling. I didn't go to any kind of school before I started college when I was 22. And didn't have any friends. Just didn't do anything with my life except eat, hang out, like pet my cat, and play video games. That was literally my life for a couple years. So I gone to the doctor and gotten diagnosed with pre-diabetes. And one day I was out walking around, huffing and puffing, and realized that if I didn't change my life, I probably wouldn't have much of a life left. So that really began the long battle with my weight. Try some stuff. Some things worked, some things didn't. I started college. I would lose some weight, and then whenever final exams would come around, I would regain a lot of it back. Rode the roller coaster for a long time. And then when I was about 26, so this was about 2006, I hit on some things that... No, when I was 2016. But when I was 26. But hit on some things that started working for me, and then I hit a wall. I hit like 210 pounds probably. My goal was about 190, and I just kind of plateaued. So the real turning point for me was I started reading a personal development book, Maximum Achievement by Brian Tracy. I don't know why I downloaded it, but I got the abridged audiobook version and just started listening to it when I was walking around a park. And there was something in there that blew my mind. I don't remember what it was. I need to go back and reread it and remember what it was. But there was something in there that just completely changed my perspective. And from there, I, as many people do, got kind of addicted to self-help content. So mainly books and videos and blogs and all this stuff. I was consuming it at a really rapid pace. It was all I was doing with my free time.
You went through that very common stage of reading, watching, but not implementing it yet.
Yeah, I was just stacking up knowledge. I was hoarding like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold and not really doing anything with it. So then something happened one day after a few months of doing this where I started getting tired of all the cliches and the platitudes and a lot of that stuff is ineffective, but some of it is harmful as well. So I started getting sick of that. So I turned to studying the actual science of how my brain and my body work. So I started studying psychology, neuroscience, and physiology, because I wanted to understand how these things worked so that I could start using them better. So I went down that route and started learning. I was fascinated by it. And then one day it hit me that I could start using what I learned to help other people improve themselves. Because a lot of people don't have the time or the resources or the access to be consuming this much material. And so I figured if I could connect some of the dots and summarize it and come up with, how-tos, and then share that it would help people. And from there, in May of 2019, a project called Improvement Geek was born. So I started creating scientific self-improvement YouTube videos once a week. And I did that for, I think, 9 months or something like that, without really missing a week.
That's a lot.
I was putting like 10 to 15 hours into these videos. Now, simultaneously, I graduated college at the end of 2018, and I started my software engineering career at the start of January 2019. So I was working 40-ish hours a week, and then I was coming home and putting all this time into learning how to be a YouTuber and creating my videos and reading, which is all I was doing with my life. And at the same time, I basically hated the software engineering industry because I was working for a very corporate company. I mean, it's a pretty good company, but corporate lifestyle is just not for me personally. Right. I know it works for some people, but it didn't work for me. And I put 6 years into college. I started when I was 22, graduated when I was almost 29. I felt like a failure. I felt like I wasted, I guess, about a quarter of my life up until then at that point. Fell into a depression. I was binge drinking. I was binge eating, abusing myself. And this whole Improvement Geek project gave me something to channel my effort into. And it caused me its own stress in a lot of ways. I was keeping to my video schedule and everything, not taking very good care of myself. But it gave me something constructive to do with my time. So around the end of 2019, I got kind of burnt out with YouTube because I wasn't really getting anywhere with it. Back then, I wasn't good at communication. It was coming across very dry and very science lecture-y. And I know that some people are into that. I don't mind that, but it's not very entertaining. Now, I want to get back to that soon. So then, in January of last year, in 2020, I decided to try out Twitter. Okay. So I got on Twitter. I had an account. It's like my personal account, but I hadn't really done anything with it. Started communicating with people, started networking, started posting some stuff. I started in January 2020 with like 200, 400 followers, and then started growing. And then, tried out different things, really latched on to productivity and ultimately performance. And basically helping people not only reach their potential, so self-actualize, but go beyond that and self-transcend. Self-transcendence is essentially you're helping other people. So that's what I'm chasing for myself, self-transcending and helping other people, but I want to help other people help other people. I want to be a multiplier.
That makes sense.
Along the way, I got some feedback that the name Improvement Geek wasn't great because some people may, here in the United States, the term geek has kind of became a compliment in a way, like it means an intelligent or passionate person. But I heard that in other countries and other cultures, that's actually pretty derogatory and could come across as self-deprecating. So I decided to change it, and I rebranded to Psypreneur almost a year ago because my target audience is mainly entrepreneurs, business owners, and my first love was psychology. Now I'm more focused on neuroscience and neurobiology, but I'll always love psychology. So I rebranded, and then late last year I started my performance coaching business, helping people one-on-one, started helping people for free, and then turned those success stories into getting actual paid clients. Worked with them. I've worked with dozens of people. And then a couple months ago, I partnered with my good friend Dan Coe. That's a lot of your listeners probably are aware of him.
Yeah.
But we partnered, and he brought me on to help with the Modern Mastery community, and now we're doing a coaching program together. So he's more of a business marketing consultant. combined our programs. So I know it's a long story and that's only part of it, but it's like that a lot of times where you start off with something and you don't really know where it's going to go, and you might not even really have an idea of what you could potentially do with it. But the main thing that I've learned from my journey, and even the stuff that happened before, where that story began that I was telling you, the main thing that I've learned throughout almost 32 years of being alive is you've got to make the best of what you got, right? And
yeah,
that's what I've tried to do. When things are good, when things are bad, when things are neutral, I try to make the best play in the moment that makes the most sense to me. And I get it wrong a lot of the times and screw things up. But then if I look back and try to make the best of those screw ups even, then things start getting better.
Right.
And then you keep doing that long enough and you're like, you look back and or just look around, you're like, okay, things are going pretty well now. I want to keep pushing, but things are going pretty well.
So basically keep trying, keep iterating, keep getting better, keep figuring out and adjusting. Yeah.
Yep.
Makes a lot of sense. You gave me a lot to unpack there, so I want to go back a little bit. Do you think your interest in approaching these self-improvement matters in a more scientific way also had something to do with the way you think, from being an engineer, being a gamer, being a person with that kind of mind? Or do you think it was just because you were wanting to broaden your perspectives on self-improvement?
Yeah, great question. I definitely think that the engineering mindset was what really led me to looking at the science of these things. I don't really know how it happened, especially with me not really getting schooling, but somehow, some way I wound up with a very logical, piece by piece engineering style of thinking. And so that's what led me away from the kind of nebulous, like self-help, fluffy, Tony Robbins style stuff to the actual science. Like, here is our best understanding so far of how these things work. That's just the way that my mind works a lot better when I have the actual pieces rather than kind of a guess of the pieces.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. And that leads me to another thing I wanted to get to more at your story, because from what you've told before, you were unofficially homeschooled, as you called it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how did you make the leap from unofficially homeschooled to going to Georgia Tech, which is, as far as I know, a great university? How did that go in your life?
Yeah, so the reason why I was unofficially, as I call it, unofficially homeschooled, people always ask, what's that supposed to mean? Basically, it means that I didn't really learn anything from the time I was born to the time that, I wasn't really taught anything from the time I was born to when I was 22 and started college. The reason why is because my mom was a traveling nurse. So she was taking contracts all across the southeastern United States, and we were moving from state to state a lot. I've lived in probably 15 different states at this point.
Wow.
So we weren't in one place for very long. I couldn't go to public school. My dad didn't really teach me anything. So to actually answer your question, what I did when I was 19 is I took my GED. So GED in America is the General Equivalency Diploma. Essentially what that is it's a piece of paper that is equivalent to a high school diploma in most cases. So for jobs and college admissions and stuff like that.
Right.
And the way it works is it's a lot like studying for the SAT or the ACT, where you study for this exam. It's got broken down into different topics. You study for it, you go take it, you pass, you get your GED. So I knew that, I found out that was my first step. So I got the GED, bombed the math section for obvious reasons, but one thing I did do when I was a kid was I read a lot. I destroyed books, and now I'm back in the habit again of consuming a lot of books. So I had a very good grasp of the English language, the way things were supposed to be laid out, grammar, stuff like that. And that carried me. really hard. Like that was my strongest subject in not only the GED, but then when I took the SAT, same thing. I didn't really know geometry, but I knew English really well. So after taking the GED, I took the SAT. For those who aren't in the US, the SAT is basically another pre-college exam that you have to take. Did that, and then I wound up going to a community college in Tennessee for a while. I went there for 2.5 years and got my associate's degree in general studies, basically, because they didn't have computer engineering there.
Right.
Transferred from there to a state university, went there for about a year, and then I applied to the Georgia Institute of Technology here in Atlanta, Georgia, and got accepted. I don't really know how, but I guess I had a good story, and I guess I did well in my application letter that I wrote out because it was something about wanting to work for NASA.
Right.
But I guess it made a good story. I did get a perfect GPA in community college for as much as that means. Maybe that helped. But yeah, it was interesting for sure because Georgia Tech was very hard. Georgia Tech is top 10 in the US and based like every engineering discipline. I think it's like the 6th best in the US or in computer engineering. It was hard for sure, but it was worth it because it taught me perseverance. That was the big thing that it taught me. So everything that I've done since Georgia Tech has been so much easier. It's felt so much easier. I remember when I did my 2 summer internships, interned at Caterpillar 1 year, I interned at a defense contractor another year. Stuff even with my business, not my career, especially the 3 years I was, or 2.5 years I was an engineer. All that stuff seems so much easier than Georgia Tech. So yeah, I may have spent, I graduated with $110,000 in student loans because my dad's not with us anymore, but my mom couldn't really help me.
Right.
So I took out loans. So I spent $110,000 getting a piece of paper that I'll probably never use again. It's not even put up on my wall. It's like framed out in the living room.
Right.
But I'm not upset about it because that helped me get where I am.
You did get other lessons from it, right? That were invaluable.
Yes. It made me a better, more resilient person.
I can't imagine, because if I was here thinking, you said your math tests bombed in the GED and not knowing geometry and getting into one of the best engineering schools in the world, that cannot have been easy to handle, like going through calculus and all of that. And so I did okay in geometry in high school, and I gave up on going to computer science or engineering for college because my teachers in high school said, "You're gonna die in college if you take this. You're not gonna be able to handle it." To which I say they were very bad teachers to say something like that. But
I have 2 things. One, my first semester at the community college, I was put in a remedial algebra class.
Okay.
And my first homework, we were doing our homeworks like in this lab. So homeworks were like modules, and we were doing them in the math lab on the computer.
Right.
And one of the questions was combine like terms. So it was a question that was like 2x plus y plus 3x plus z equals ? And obviously it's like, oh, okay, I combine the 2x and the x and you get 3x. Like that's the final answer. I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue whatsoever what that meant. And that made me feel stupider than I had felt in my entire life. I legitimately cried after that. I rarely ever tell that story, but I legitimately cried after that because of how stupid I felt.
Right.
So I went from that somehow to Georgia Tech. And I say somehow because whenever I tell this story, I feel bad. I feel like I'm bragging, and I don't like feeling that way. So I always downplay it, but it's like, it was resilience, but reaching out for help, like leaning on my classmates, my teachers, the TAs, online resources, like doing whatever I had to do, spending hours if I had to, but like putting in the time and not giving up.
I don't think it's bragging, because if I had heard this when I was in high school, it might have changed my whole life for real, because I might have had another attitude. So there might be a kid who listens to this and thinks, oh, okay, so I'm struggling with math now, but maybe I can go to an engineering school. Maybe I can go to computer science. I can study stuff like that. So I don't think it's bragging. I think it's a great story to illustrate like how far you can go if you actually want it, if you are willing to have the resiliency, have the consistency, and put in the work. So I like that story.
And the other thing I was going to say that relates to that is when I was at the community college, there was a vice president of engineering who told me to my face that I wouldn't get into Georgia Tech.
Damn.
And I did it.
Yeah.
And so there was that moment. And I actually started college as a business major.
Oh.
And I changed my major 6 weeks into my first semester because my advisor wasn't a very pleasant person. And also I realized, hey, I'm a nerd. Like, I like computers. I'll make that work for me. Like, maybe I'll work for Intel or something like that.
Right.
Design some hardware. So I changed my major. Well, when I went to do that and I met my engineering advisor, so they didn't have computer engineering, but they had an engineering department.
Okay.
In case anybody's like, that doesn't make sense. When I was talking to her and I told her about my history and about, my math and everything, she quite literally laughed in my face. She was sitting across the desk from me and she laughed at me. And she said, well, we'll just have to see how you do with math. And I tell that not because I'm like vindictive or anything like that, but you talked about somebody listening to this and getting inspiration from it. You may have people in your life that are like that tell you, oh, you can't do this. It may be strangers, it may be friends, it may be your close family members. But you can't it's disappointing, it hurts, but you can't let that stop you from trying anyway, because they don't know what you're capable of.
100%.
You yourself don't know what you're capable of. Like, our potential as human beings and as individuals is like, it's over the horizon. If somebody's a flat earther, then they're not going to believe this, but whatever. But it's like over the horizon, and you only get to see further over that horizon if you move forward. Yeah. So somebody who hasn't really tried anything in life yet may not feel like they're capable of much. But when you start trying, when you start broadening those or chasing that horizon, then you start seeing more and more of your world of potential.
Yeah.
I think that metaphor works.
I agree. I think it works as well. It makes me think of the Dunning-Kruger curve, but in a more positive way.
Yeah.
Where you think, oh, no, this is the peak, and then you look up and you're like, oh, no, I can still climb a lot more. I can go a lot farther.
That's a challenging moment when you get there.
It
because is. A lot of people, and I felt this with myself mentally and physically as well, because you can feel it, in the gym, or if you start learning a martial art or sport, you can start being like, yeah, like I know this, I'm good. And then you realize that you're not so good. And you realize that you're standing on a boulder at the foot of the mountain. And that's the moment that either makes you or breaks you. Yeah. I feel like
those moments where you plateau and you have to be like, all right, am I going to go beyond this, or is this the end of the line?
Am I going to go home, or am I going to start climbing?
Yeah.
And I think there are some people who do go home.
Yeah.
And then those are the people who live with regret because they always wonder what could have been.
Yeah. I very much understand the story about being told stuff like that, because in high school I also had an English teacher who told me I would never use my English professionally. And it's funny because she antagonized me because I had great English already in high school. My whole family speaks English. It's the greatest gift my family ever gave me, was learning a second language ever since I was, 1. But she didn't like me. She thought I was conceited because of that, and she always tried to put me down. And she said once to everyone in the class that I would never use my English professionally. Well, I made a career out of it, being a translator and interpreter. It's literally what took me away from being broke. It's literally what gave me a meaning in life. So don't let people define who you are, who you're going to be, who you want to be. Even if they're close to you, they're teachers, your friends, parents, whoever. You're the only one who's going to figure out where your potential is, and it's up to you to go after it.
You define yourself, really. I mean, your perspective and your expectations of yourself in the world really create your experience.
Yeah.
From what I've found. If you expect things to go poorly and yourself to perform poorly in a given situation, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
But the reverse is often true as well. And that's because when you don't think that things are going to work out for you, your brain doesn't really fully engage and you don't really fully try.
Right.
But if you think that it is going to go well for you and you think that you can rise to meet the challenge in front of you, then you start engaging a lot more of your capabilities so that you can, succeed or at least fight a good fight in whatever battle you're in.
Yeah. And you talked about in your story about the period where you were working on your job and working on YouTube and in the end taking very little care of yourself. And now you're someone who talks a lot about good sleep, resting, taking care of yourself. Did that change start with yourself first? Did you start implementing those things in your life and seeing the difference it made, or realizing that you had to take better care of yourself? How did you go from the Joey who was doing that to the Joey today who is a stickler for brain dumping and good sleeping habits and so on?
Unfortunately, no, it didn't start with myself. Nowadays, I make an effort to kind of beta test things and, try things on myself first before I recommend anybody else do them.
Right.
But back then, when I first started out, when I started learning about different self-care methods and things that you should be doing, I was recommending them to people and making videos about them, but I wasn't doing them myself.
Right.
And so what wound up happening after a few months was I was neglecting abusing myself, like I said. And I got to a point where I realized that because I wasn't taking good care of myself, I wasn't able to take as good a care of my viewers as I could. My videos were lower quality and they weren't doing as much good as they could for the viewer. And that was a huge turning point for me because I realized that the better care I took of myself, then the better I could do for everyone else. I think a lot of people are altruistic and they mean well and they want to put everybody else above themselves. But the problem is that when you do that, you start burning out.
Yep.
You can only give so much. And if you neglect yourself, your mental health drops, your physical health drops, you're not sleeping, you're not eating right, you're not exercising enough, you're not taking care of you, then you don't have as much to give anyone else.
Yeah.
And so this relates to a concept called altruistic selfishness, which basically means that by taking care of yourself, you're better equipped to take care of others. So that's why now, as much as I want to do for my business and my clients and my community, I make as good of an effort as I can to still take care of myself and stick to my routines, make sure I get to the gym every day, try to sleep somewhat good, do brain dumps, improve my nutrition, things like that, like mitigate stress, so that when I get on a call with a client, I get on a podcast like this, something related to my business, I'm bringing my best self, because that's what people deserve from me, is the best me that I can give them.
I love one of Jordan Peterson's rules, which is take care of yourself as if you were someone you were responsible for helping.
Yep.
Which deals exactly with that idea. Like, you are important and you're not going to be able to take care of nobody else if you don't take care of yourself first.
Yep.
Or even if you do, it's going to be for a limited amount of time before things start dropping off. And it's a hard lesson to learn. We usually have this instinct of leaving us leaving ourselves in second place and thinking that, oh, I'll take care of me when I have time or when things are easier. But just like we always say on Twitter that no one's ever ready, it's never going to be easier. It's never going to be that time if you don't make that time.
Yep. Exactly. I mean, you got to make time to prioritize it, or else you'll be forced to because of health issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it's going to be a lot worse on you. Right. You're also someone who talks about moderation a lot, about enjoying things. You kind of deviate from the whole Twitter thing of no video games, no beer, no this, no that, no.
Yeah.
How do you feel being the guy that does that in a space that is so usually polarizing, because that's what Twitter lends itself to?
I don't mind being that guy, honestly. I somehow I'm not an insecure person. I mean, I am sometimes in some ways, but I don't require universal validation or like attention or anything like that. So I don't mind going against the grain, which can kind of get your own attention in a way. But I don't mind speaking up for what I believe and what I've found from my reading to be the most accurate way of going about things, which is also often moderation is fine. Like if you can play video games for a couple hours in the afternoon, like cool, like do that if that's not negatively impacting you. You know, if doing something that you like isn't negatively impacting yourself or anybody around you, and it's not, you know, holding you back from your goals, then yeah, like why not? Like do what you want to do.
Right.
But that requires you to be honest with yourself. You know, if video games are getting in your way of building a business or a social media following or learning guitar or something like that, then it's time to ask yourself a tough question about like, okay, what's really my priority here?
Right.
But as far as Twitter's concerned, I mean, I don't mind being the anti-guru because I'm trying to be a voice for objective truth and reality, I guess, and that sounds like really dramatic. But you know, I was talking to Dan about this earlier on our podcast, and I talked about it on my walk that I'm going to post in a little bit. But people get so tribal about everything. You know, like a perfect example is this whole war between vegans and carnivores and keto people, and if it fits your macros, and like all these different ways of eating that all kind of sort of work, you know. And we get so focused on, oh, it has to be this one way or you're ruining your health, when that's not really the case, you know. So what I try to push people to do is to try things and see what works for them. Perfect example is my mom. My mom's lost about 40 pounds this year following a low carb diet very consistently. Works for her. She can go back to it, like she can have a cheat day with me and then go right back to it the next day.
Right.
Doesn't work for me. Just doesn't, due to time and other things, doesn't work for me. So I've just been doing typical high protein calorie deficit diet to lose a little bit more weight. You know, so, you know, I don't really play video games much right now. I might get back to that in the future, but it's like I said, I mean, it really just comes down to doing what works for you and your goals and not hurting yourself or holding yourself back or not hurting other people around you.
At the end, it comes down to knowing yourself, right? Because there's no point into completely cutting something out of your life to improve your business or to improve your performance in something and make yourself completely miserable in process. Yeah.
And that's something I feel like people do. I mean, I know that I've done this a lot. People procrastinate about being happy and satisfied. And I think that's kind of sort of human nature. I mean, there are elements of that are hardwired into our neurobiology,
right?
But we put off being happy and put off being satisfied, and so we're just always kind of discontent. with things.
And always looking for the next thing that's going to make us happy.
Right. And that causes some stress, and that causes some bad decisions. Like, if you're stressed out, you're probably going to eat some bad food or drink too much alcohol or play too much video games or get into even worse things. But if you find ways to make yourself more like happier and more satisfied in the moment, increase your baseline mood, then you're going to be less prone to those destructive things, over consuming these things, which is destructive. Right. And you're going to make better decisions. You're going to be better able to moderate.
Right.
The times in my life where I've struggled the most with binge eating, binge drinking, binge gaming, all that stuff to a destructive level is when I had a lot of stress in my life.
Yeah.
And those things contribute to stress. Whereas when I'm feeling pretty good about things, I don't feel as those urges to overconsume. I can moderate. Like, I can have a couple beers with a friend and be fine. I can play video games for an hour and be fine with that. Like, it's a cycle that feeds itself. Like, I'm stressed, so I'm going to binge drink tonight. I wake up with a hangover the next day. I'm behind, like, I feel like crap. I'm behind on everything, and that causes stress.
Yeah.
That was my life a few years ago, where it just kept cycling over and over and over.
And at the end, either way, it's going to compound, right? You either create a virtuous cycle where you're doing better things for yourself, going to the gym, improving your mood, and feeling better little by little, or you're going to compound into a vicious cycle and let things spiral out of control.
Yep, that's exactly right. But one of the big keys is to be aware of what kind of cycle you're in and realize that no matter how far down a bad cycle or up on a good cycle you are, it can change.
Right.
And it can change pretty quickly. And that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on which way it goes. Yeah. So if you're on a bad cycle, be realistic. You can change it. If you're on a good cycle, be realistic and keep yourself on that path.
Yeah.
Because I had a period a few years ago where my weight was looking really good. And then I hit my final exams ever, final semester, graduated, had Christmas break, started my career, got depressed, gained a lot of weight back really quickly.
Yeah.
And it can change so quick.
Yeah, I went through that at the start of the lockdowns last year.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
A lot of things went out of my control. I was supposed to get married. I was supposed to started trying to move to the U.S. and all of a sudden can't go to the U.S., can't see my fiancée, can't do a lot of things, can't go to the gym, start stress eating. Next thing I know, I had put on 20 pounds.
Yep.
Without even noticing that. When I got back to the gym and went back to habitually weighing myself, I had a shock. It was like, oh, damn.
Yep.
That's how bad it got, and I didn't notice how bad it got while it was happening. So awareness is key here. There's no question about it.
Yeah, these big changes happen bit by bit and then seemingly all at once.
Exactly.
But it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, from a scientific, physiological or neurobiological perspective, it's neutral. We have good habits or we have bad habits, but really at the core it's just habits.
Right.
Whether they're helpful or harmful is contextual.
Yeah. So,
the underlying mechanism of it all pretty much works the same. We just have to make sure that we and our biology or we and our neurology are working with each other rather than against each other.
Right. Another thing I wanted to know from you, you went from a STEM field, working pretty much on the hard sciences, to working with people. Even though your work's still backed very much by science, that's what you do. You do performance coaching based on neuroscience and psychology.
Yep.
You went from having to deal with people and machines, let's put it this way, because even as an engineer, you're still working with people, to working directly with people on soft skills and on developing that side, did you have to develop any like communication skills, any other skills besides your knowledge on improvement, productivity, and so on? Did you have to bridge any gaps there?
Kind of yes and kind of no. So somehow when I started college, I was relatively skilled at communication and getting along with people. I think that had a lot to do with playing World of Warcraft, which is a social cooperative game. So I was in guilds, which are groups of players
right,
working to achieve a goal. So I was on, back in the day we had Ventrilo, which was Discord before there was Discord. So I was talking to people pretty often.
right.
I think it was also due to me reading so much. So as cheesy as it feels to say, I had a pretty good understanding of how social situations were supposed to go. So that helped. And I'm a bit of an overthinker, and I'm a lot of an overthinker. So I'm a very empathetic person. I feel like I have a very high EQ, emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And that helps a lot with communication.
It does.
Especially when it's one-on-one or it's a coaching relationship that I have with my clients. So I'm able to pick up on nonverbal communication or the way somebody says something, or maybe somebody's hiding something or not really getting enough into it. So that's really something that I've leaned into with my business or my coaching with my clients is, pick up on as much as I can, not overanalyze, but really lean into that empathy and ask the right questions.
Right.
And that was one of the big shifts that happened months ago with my coaching. Initially it was very prescriptive, upfront, like me talking to the person and telling them what to do. But I pretty quickly realized that some things that work for one person won't work for another. We're different, especially on a psychological level. Like with physiology and neurobiology, like one thing that works for one person pretty much works for everybody. Psychology, not so much. So what I learned was to start off by giving people, the fundamentals, self-care, task management, time management, that stuff, and then switch and become reactive. And being reactive requires asking the right questions and sometimes challenging people if I don't feel like they're really being forthcoming or giving enough detail or, have the right perspective on something. So that was a really interesting transition. I got along with people fine before, like in my career, I'm a weirdly outgoing person. I love being around people. I'm a pretty quiet and reserved guy, like even still. I'll be the dude at a party who's just kind of vibing and having a good time. Like I may seem like I'm quiet and pissed off about something, but if you get me in a conversation, like I'll talk about whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so to actually answer your question through all that meandering stuff, I'd say the big thing for me was, or the big thing that I had to switch to when I started doing my coaching with my clients is asking more questions and knowing when to be reactive and knowing when to be proactive, when to take initiative and ask questions and then switch into being reactive and figure out how to help them based on their answer and their situation and their challenges.
Right. That makes sense. But you do defeat the stereotype of the engineer who doesn't know how to deal with people. You definitely get away from that.
Yeah. So when I was at Tech, there was a lot of programming students who weren't great socially.
Right.
And that's because, Georgia Tech is like a hotbed of, it's like the concentration of all of the nerdy kids in high school that were doing AP classes and didn't really have many friends. They were just bookworms and got incredible grades. And then you take all these exceptional rock star students and you put them all together in one place, and then nobody's really exceptional anymore.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a really weird thing to contend with.
Yeah. And
so
now that you mention it, you're at the same time putting them in a new situation and taking away something that's a big part of their identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, yeah, we're all nerds here. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people that were like that, but they were very skilled. You know, they were very intelligent, obviously, like that's how they got there. They had good skills, but they didn't have great communication skills.
Right.
And you know, we've talked about Toastmasters. You know, we both were officers in Toastmasters, and communication is such a vital. It may be the most important skill to have, honestly, because no matter what you know, I feel like if you can't communicate it to another person, it's not going to get you very far. Yeah. And obviously that's kind of on a spectrum, but I feel like the better you are at communicating with people and empathizing with people and reacting to people, the better you're going to do in life.
Right.
I would say, because otherwise, if you can't really explain your skill or sell your skill or ideas or anything like that to another person, okay, cool. Like you have a 4.0 from Georgia Tech, like your resume looks great, but you can't communicate.
Yeah.
And that means you probably can't get along with the team.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I know that that's happened to some of my peers in the past.
Yeah. What I saw a lot in Toastmasters, in my club, in the first club I was president of, was people coming from engineering schools who were great at their jobs,
yep,
but were stuck in their careers because people wanted them to move to a manager role, but they couldn't because they really had no idea how to communicate to a human being. They were brilliant, but stuck with that. So I even coached some of them personally to help them out with that, and they flourish.
Yep.
Especially because they are bright, they are intelligent, they can learn things. So
they can follow directions then.
Yep. And people, I think people really underestimate the power of communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that you either have it or you don't. And no, it's a learnable skill.
Yeah.
It's very learnable, like any other skill. Which leads me to an interesting question, which is, what is your hate for how to make friends and influence people?
Yeah, that's one of the most polarizing things that I say. That's up there with telling people that they should drink less coffee. I read the book for the first time a couple years ago.
All right.
So for me, it may be like I watched The Lord of the Rings for the first time last year. I watched the entire trilogy and I didn't like it. So
okay.
The reason why I say that, it may not seem relevant, but like with Lord of the Rings, I was like, okay, if I had seen this when it came out, I probably would have loved it, and it'd still be one of my favorite trilogies to date.
All right.
But watching this now, it didn't age well.
Right.
It looks like some dudes from like Comic-Con took some camcorders out into the woods and just LARPed for 2 hours. Similar thing with How to Win Friends and Influence People. I feel like if I had read it when it came out, I would have loved it and thought that it was awesome. But I don't feel like it aged well.
That makes sense.
Part of that is because I was reading it and I was thinking, holy crap, this is like a used car salesman. Like, this is the idea of the slimy salesman, like the tactics that they use. And that kind of stuff, like subconsciously, at least nowadays for our current generations, it can kind of consciously or even unconsciously like put us off.
Yeah.
Like if somebody comes up to you and they're like trying to like ask you questions and like they're like really smiley and yes man and that kind of thing, it's just kind of off-putting and you just get a bad vibe from it. It's like, okay, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
So my problem with the book overall, I would say, it's got some info in it that's still good. I mean, the part about asking people questions about themselves, that's great advice. You should really definitely do that. Yeah. People love talking about themselves. But I would say not to follow the book word for word. I would say like go through it and kind of take it with a grain of salt, I guess. Just don't follow all of those things like word for word, because if you do, you're going to come across as kind of a slimy salesman.
I very much agree with that.
Like that's the Salesman's Bible, essentially. Like, you know that millions of salesman dudes were like given that book and told, like, you need to study this thing and use it. And so those things have become internalized to that like type of person, and now that type of person is off-putting, and so therefore the behaviors are too.
Yeah. My feeling with it is that it gets the general points right. Some of the ideas, the basic summary of it, a lot of it works, like asking people questions about them or complimenting people genuinely, not flattering. But when you get down to the stories and the book telling you how to apply it, it really goes down a road that has a very used car salesman feel to it. So I agree, it does have value, but you take it with a grain of salt. It's funny because Dale Carnegie's Art of Public Speaking aged a lot better than that book.
Really? I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah, it aged a lot better. It also, it hasn't aged perfectly, but it has more universal things and less slimy things, let's put it that way, than how to make friends and influence people. So
yeah, I really just felt like some of the stuff in How to Win Friends was presented as being knowingly manipulative.
Right, yeah.
I felt like some of the point of the book was, here's stuff that you can do to get people to do what you want.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's not like how to make friends. It's more so like how to make customers or something. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you could say the same thing for Influence by Cialdini, where it's like you could say like, oh, well, that's another one that's recommended to salesmen. And you could say, well, oh, this one is, you could easily use all this stuff to manipulate people and sell them stuff they don't need. Right. But it was presented different, I guess.
Yeah, it does have a different feeling because, like you said, How to Win Friends literally has phrases like, this is how you get people to do what you want.
Yeah.
And that really comes off with a very different, not so good vibe to it.
Exactly.
But it has good pointers, and I agree. It's just a book that it's from a different time and moving in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I think, personally, I think one of the best bits of communication advice is to not take yourself so seriously / don't overthink it as much. And I know don't think so much is terrible advice, but people, from a psychological perspective, people kind of aren't all that complex, but they also are really complex. But people aren't as judgmental as you think they will be. You know, like the people that you want to be around and impress aren't as judgmental as you think they will be. Yeah. And the flaws that you have that you're aware of, just because you're aware of a flaw or you're aware of like, oh man, I use so many filler words, I just said like, other people may not have even picked up on that.
Yeah.
You know? So if you just stop taking yourself so seriously and talk to people, obviously conversation is different from presenting or a conference call or something like that. But if you just talk to people, then usually you're going to be fine.
Yes.
But if you overthink it, and something that I experienced with the Toastmasters group I was in, is there were some professionals who had great skills, but they were just overthinking it. And they were trying too hard. And when you try too hard in communication, it comes across badly. It comes across off-putting.
Yeah.
People can pick up on that stress that you have. But if you just kind of chill as much as you can, it's hard advice. Trying to try less is weird, but
but it does make sense.
It is effective, because I mean that's one of the biggest things that I found with my communication, be it with a client or even on sales calls or just podcasts or normal conversations, like going up to approaching a girl. Like the less I think about it, the better it goes.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, two things to realize is that things generally aren't about you, and people aren't paying that much attention to you.
Right.
So, on the two situations you said, on a conversation, there's a big likelihood that the person you're talking to is just as worried as how they look, how they're coming off, as you are. So they're not going to be paying attention to you. They're going to be in their own heads worried about that.
Yep.
And when you're in a conference call or a presentation or something, you are the third or fourth thing in people's minds. They're worried about themselves. They're worried about the topic you're presenting, and only then they're going to start thinking about you. So there's layers of things coming before you. If you take yourself less seriously, don't overthink it. Just generally bring a good vibe to it. Bring your energy into it, and that will work 90% of the time.
Be able to laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
That's something that I've worked on, is just kind of like laughing at myself. Like if I mess something up or make a mistake, forget something, mispronounce somebody's name, like I just kind of laugh it off, and that eases the tension.
Yeah, it really
a
does.
lot. It's
really does.
much better than freaking out and apologizing for the mistake. It's just like, and just, make a silly joke. Don't get self-deprecating too hard, but just like laugh it off.
Yeah.
And nobody will care.
Exactly. So Joey, after all this journey you went through, after all of this, what's the main message you'd like to leave to someone who's struggling, who wants to start improving? Where should they start? What do you leave to someone who's just getting into this, just thinking, I think I can do better in life?
I would say the first step would be to figure out a direction. Start setting a goal or a few goals. Figure out a direction and then break it down from there. If you want to lose weight, you want to lose 100 pounds, okay, cool. And then break that down into focus on the next 10 pounds or something. And then figure out how to achieve that small piece. Because back when I was 370 pounds, when I thought about losing weight, I thought about it before my pre-diabetes diagnosis. It would seem overwhelming. And I'm like, I don't know how I could lose 170 pounds.
Right.
And big goals like that, you don't achieve them all at once. You achieve them bit by bit. So I would say figure out a direction and figure out how to start making progress towards that. Understand that it may be a long journey. As I said at the start of this, self-development, self-actualization, self-transcendence, it's all a long journey. And it's never ending in ways, but it keeps getting better as you go. It's kind of like when you're playing a video game, like an RPG, and you start out at level 1 and you go fight some wolves or something, and then a little while later you level up and you're like level 10. It's not that everything's easier. You're not still fighting like level 1 wolves or whatever. You're now fighting enemies that are as challenging or maybe more challenging, but you're fighting better battles. You're fighting more satisfying things. And to relate that to the real world, as you improve yourself, it's not that life necessarily gets easier. You're better able to take on better challenges and do better things and do more satisfying things, do more good for other people. So have that perspective that it's going to be challenging, but as long as you're making progress, then it's a satisfying challenge.
Right. Just keep getting better as a player in the video game of life, basically.
Exactly.
Very good. Joey, you're part of Modern Mastery HQ, which I always link to here in the YouTube.
Awesome.
You are a performance coach with your own clients. How can people get in touch with you? Twitter? How else can they find you if they're interested in learning more about your coaching or about Modern Mastery or your other offers? How can they find you?
So the best place to contact me would either be on Twitter, which is twitter.com/Psypreneur, PSYPRENEUR, or email me, joey@psypreneur.com.
All right.
I keep up with my email pretty well, so either one of those would be great.
Yes, and you also have a great newsletter. I'll put the link on the description for people who may want to sign up and get some tips on productivity, on how to have a better morning. You still send out that morning productivity playbook?
Yep. Yeah, people get that as soon as they sign up, and
Right.
I just switched my newsletter schedule to being once a week, so that's Thursday mornings.
All right. That playbook really helped me. It was very useful for me with a lot of things in creating a better morning routine for me. So
Awesome.
I
Glad to
really
hear it.
recommend it. I couldn't recommend it more. So Joey, thank you very much for this. Your story is really inspiring. I feel it can bring hope to people. I feel like it's something I could have heard when I was in high school or in my early 20s when I was broke and without a direction. So thank you very much. This has been inspiring. It has been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having me, man. Hopefully this finds somebody who needs to hear it.
I hope so too. And this is it for today. I'll see you all soon with more doses of insights on learning, writing, speaking, and living life a little bit better from the King's Pen. Sitting in the highest tower on a castle made of sand, watching the pieces all fall down. I don't own a throne, no, I don't even own a crown. I just sit and I watch it all fall down. Sitting here, it gives me the time to take the time and I'll make the time to pick the pieces from my